Yeah, it's Australia's dirty secret. This is going on every night, and it's just uncomfortable to talk about.
The joeys are either in the pouch, and the shooters drag them out of the pouch and then smash their heads over the bull bar or
Stomp on them.
stomp on their heads,
We've witnessed this, so we know this is true.
or slit their throats alive just there and then. Like that's a normal way to treat baby animals and our native wildlife.
It's clearly an issue, and we're really worried about what's happening and the decimated, the declining populations. So yeah, and we can all play our part by becoming educated and becoming knowledgeable on what is really going on, because as I said at the beginning, we've been lied to all this time.
Hello and welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with amazing individuals from all around the world and look for ways to create a clean, green and sustainable future for us, the planet and all beings. I'm your host, Tom Simak, a fellow plant eater and athlete, here to facilitate those impactful conversations. Who you heard at the beginning there was Kate and Mick McIntyre. Just before we get into the episode, I just want to mention that every single episode on this show goes live on YouTube. Now, this is to serve those visually inclined that love to watch things, that listen to things, everyone's working from home these days, like a lot of people. If you want to put that episode on the background on YouTube while you're doing your work so you can educate yourself, support the show, and work away at the same time, which seems like a win-win for everyone. On YouTube, we've also got the short snippets of the episode. So if there's a particular part you love, you can save it, bookmark it, all the above. Now, on to the episode. Kate and Mick. This Aussie couple founded the independent film production company called Second Nature Films that recently produced an SBS on-demand series called Eating Plants. Their work includes award-winning feature films such as Kangaroo, Yogawoman, What to Do About Whales, and Aussie Rules the World. It's seen their films positively reviewed in the New York Times, LA Times, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, BBC, and Monde. The most recent docu-series, Eating Plants, looks at the global dietary sensation that is plant-based foods, featuring the likes of Dr. Neal Barnard, Eric Adams, Miyoko Shinner, Shaun Morison, and more. Today we're going to dive into creative storytelling and what it was like to film a plant-based or a docu-series about plant-based living and lifestyles. Now, the other film we're going to look at today is Kangaroo, a love-hate story. I'm not going to lie or beat around the bush here, but there is a dark side to this episode and to this conversation where I truthfully had to hold back tears or a lot of emotions, I guess, from coming out. So I just wanted to preface that it could get quite emotional for a lot of you, and in particular the reason is because we love animals and we have that compassion towards them. So just be prepared regarding that you might get a bit emotional as part of it. Now, I think it's much needed. I'm not going to take it out, or I'm not going to brush it paint it with a brush of positivity, because it is important. And I want those few facts that we do talk about today, I want them to stick within you so that you can take this episode and hopefully the knowledge you learn with this conversation to the real life with your friends and family so that we can take this conversation further. Now, with all that being said, I do believe this episode is incredibly impactful and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I will see you on the other side. Kate, Mick, welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast. How are you going?
Hey there,
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So firstly, to start this conversation, I want to say congratulations on your recent release of Eating Plants. Awesome news.
Well, it's always a big thing to get a film out during or after or around a COVID lockdown. So we feel pretty proud of ourselves that we've managed to get something out so quick after we were allowed out.
Yeah, it's a great feeling because it can be very isolating experience editing. literally weeks and weeks of sitting in an editing suite and finally getting to share it, because people really don't really know what you're doing. So it's nice to get it out, and then they go, "Oh, that's what you've been doing all this time."
Yeah. We haven't
So,
seen them in a while. Has someone
that's
taken
right.
them or?
Edit mammal, we call it.
Yeah, little edit animal we become. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what has the reaction been so far following the release of Eating Plants?
I think it's been a great kind of mix, because it's, the fantastic thing in Australia, it was on SBS, and then on SBS On Demand, and so a wide range of people have seen it, which is great, because that's really who we made it for, a really mainstream audience. I think for the vegan community, they're really excited to have any food, cooking, anything that's in that space, me included, just love watching cooking shows. But if they're not vegan, it's not so fun. But so they're been pleased. But the sort of, I guess, the best response for us has been that the plant curious have been writing to us and saying, "Oh, we love those episodes. We tried that food," or just sending us the photos of their breakfast that they've chosen the vegan option at a restaurant the next day. So, all those things for us are really positive.
Yeah, I think the reaction also has been that people are really enjoying something positive to watch.
Oh yeah.
And that's a nice thing for people to, enjoy the positive nature of the series. We always intended it to be positive and uplifting. That was our intention when we made the show. So yeah, and people have really appreciated that.
Oh, absolutely. To have that positivity there and is just absolutely crucial in this day and age. And before we get ahead of ourselves here, because I've got plenty I'd love to dive into, could you explain Eating Plants as a bit of a context to set the stage for the episode?
Yeah, I mean, we decided that we wanted to help people understand what all the fuss is about, if you like. What is this plant-based revolution that's going on? What is it that's filling up the shelves in the supermarkets all of a sudden, and what is it that that is this growth industry? And we wanted to do it in a sort of a pared back mainstream way. So we wanted to unpack what it is and what the products look like, how you use them, how you cook them. We really wanted to, didn't we? And it was for our own interest as well, wasn't it? Because we were interested in, learning more about what all these new products are and how to use them and how easy it is to be plant-based.
That's awesome. And so just out of curiosity, are you both plant-based?
Yeah.
Yeah. And did that give you that extra motivation? Wait, are you vegan or are you plant-based?
Both.
Well, we yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I see them as the same thing, but if we're both, yeah.
Both. So given that you've got some sort of connection to, we on the show we've talked about plant-based, just given those people that are enjoy, they do it for generally health purposes, and veganism is more morally aligned, so the animals, the environment, etc. So given that you're connected, and I gather this because of one of your previous documentaries, which we'll get into, Kangaroo, you're ethically aligned. And so did that give some sort of almost like a motivation to make this film even more impactful, and why you're so happy that it has hit that mainstream?
Well, I think that we just wanted to make something that was uplifting for people. That felt really important, a sort of real positive spin on it, and invite people to come closer and get to know how to do it and what to do. And that just felt like a really strong kind of political, but also just a generally warm embrace of going, God, you guys should try out this milk. You guys should try out this cheese. I know that you love cheese, but you should try, this version of it. So one of the things was that my neighbor was having a chat with me one day, and she said, I've just been to this great yoga retreat and they made this amazing vegan food. You would have loved it, but boy, I've come home and I just don't know what to do. So I've just gone back to my regular diet. And, you hear those stories 1,000 times. And, that's who we made it for.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to circle back to something you said at the beginning, which is that you did this kind of like in your editor room in isolation during the whole vid and all that. So how did that impact how the show was produced? Given that you've done films in the past, and this isn't a very vegan or plant-based question, but how did the process of making something like a docu-series during a pandemic differentiate from previous films or potentially future films?
I felt incredibly fortunate that we had all this material to edit during the lockdowns. I just felt like the luckiest guy in the world because we had all this amazing material that we managed to film before the pandemic. So we were in a really different situation than most filmmakers, who obviously had to sit on their hands waiting to get back out there. We were in a really different position. We had filmed in 5 countries before the pandemic, so we had a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And so, if bizarrely enough, lockdown didn't affect the process of the edit. Emotionally, of course, it did because it was a really full on time in the world. But back to what I said, during that full on time, I felt really lucky that I was able to apply my craft during the lockdown, and it perhaps it influenced us making it positive. I think there's no doubt that we realised that positivity was a good thing at the moment for our own mental health as well as the world. So I think yes, it perhaps could have edited. It perhaps could have influenced that part of it because it was we've obviously the planet's gone through some really tricky, dark times, and here we were making a show, and I'm very grateful that we were able to make it positive because it really did help us.
I think it felt very timely too. I know that there's a lot of mainstream press has been looking at, the side effects of COVID and the lockdowns and stuff, and just going, people are more interested in their health. They are feeling more vulnerable with the climate. They are, feeling a certain vulnerability, and lots of vegan products and health issues and things came to the fore in people's lives. So I think the timing actually turned out really well for us. And the other thing that we enjoyed was because the Eating Plants is 6 episodes, and they're all shot in different parts of the world and some of the top vegan countries, but really fun countries that people like to visit. Like we went to places like Berlin and Beijing and London, and like it was just it's kind of a feast. And so even while we were sitting in our edit suite, we're also getting this lovely feeling of being in Berlin with these great friends that we made, or
wondering whether we're ever going to travel again.
So, and when people have been watching it now, because lots of people haven't really got on planes yet, they're really enjoying that too, going, oh, I remember Berlin, that was so fun, or oh, look, London's looking so great, I can't believe there's so many vegan options there, I can't wait to get back to London. And so that's sort of a really interesting sort of outcome of the whole issue.
I'm going to ask you a hard question to follow on with that. You've got this 6 episodes from memory, and like you said, they're going to these incredible vegan meccas like Australia as a whole, Beijing, Berlin, these capitals that are just full of amazing foods. And you went and visited, Miyoko's Creamery, and I think it was Beyond Meat as well. You've got a lot of, I guess, items on the agenda, a lot of experiences. What were some of your highlights beyond the whole 6 episodes that really made you think that this is going to be a really positive series?
Look, there's no doubt that in our game as documentary makers, if we learn something, we know the audience is going to learn something. If it's new, the audience is going to see it as new, and it's almost like a responsibility as filmmakers to do that, because we know that if we're not presenting new information or we're not learning, then the audience isn't going to learn, and therefore, as a documentary, you're not going to enjoy it. So there's no doubt that we learned a lot. We learned a lot for our own lives. Our cooking has improved out of sight because of what we learned. each episode ends with a chef cooking a meal. That was an intention of ours, and each of those 6 new meals we now incorporate into our life. I mean, that's that alone has been an absolute boon for us.
I think
I'm
one of the fun
going to
things.
stop you there before you continue on, Kate. What's a recipe? Give me one. Rattle one off.
The mac cheese is one of our favorites. The mac cheese recipe from the American episode is just awesome.
Can you
It's
run us
simple.
through it?
Huh?
Run us through it.
Well,
Okay, so it's just a cashew cheese, which is really nice with miso and vinegar and cashews and coconut milk. So it's a really rich sort of umami cheese. So just regular.
I know the miso. Like, I didn't know about miso.
Yeah,
Putting miso in your cashew cheese is amazing.
really nice. Yeah, and then she just did a special. Daphne Chang. She did a really special, beautiful. Finely cut oyster mushrooms and makes them kind of like a bacon, so they're really crispy. And
She added tamari. Did she add tamari?
Yeah, a little bit of tamari and rosemary. So that's like a really yummy sort of crisp.
And that umami flavor of those mushrooms.
And then she put also roasted almonds on the top. So it's just got this and then
the macaroni pasta.
And then the microgreens. And so it's just like this yummy topping that you would just eat on its own anyway, and the bottom's just all that creamy comfort food. So it's just a really, and
it's easy to make. Like, you can make, we make it often now, and it just.
I think one of the fun things that people said again and again is you don't have to miss out on anything. And what people have actually said, and it's really fun, was going to like factories and stuff where you saw what went into food and the goodness that went in. There's sort of no hiding it on the packaging. No. They really are happy for you to say what's in the product. And one of the highlights for me was going to the organic tofu farm in China. And, we've eaten tofu for years, and even back in the day before it was really packaged, we just get fresh tofu from the bucket in the fridge at the health food store. And so, it's just sort of been it's like an old friend. And to go to the organic farm where they grow the soybeans. They grow the soybeans, and then the process they have with grinding their beans is like stone on stone, and it's like 1,000 years old, this sort of big antique looking grinder that they still think is the most effective. And then, of course, the best thing is you end up with the fresh tofu, and we go inside, and the owner, who's also a chef, has made 17 different types of tofu, like spaghetti tofu and soft tofu and like pastry looking tofu, and just all this amazing tofu food, and we ate it. So
that's incredible.
That was really nice, yeah. And beautiful warm soy milk, which you get quite often in China, which is a really lovely drink to be offered.
I feel like, every time we felt the love, we felt like the viewer was going to get that.
Awesome.
It's interesting you say that about the ingredients, because another intention we wanted was to put the ingredients on the screen.
So people knew.
That was part of that desire to show how healthy it is. So when you look at Miyoko's creamery, her recipes, you're like, really? That's all it is? And yet it tastes so yummy? Like, there's literally no bad
additives
or anyway, and I'm glad we did that. Most of the time we flash up the ingredients on the screen for people to appreciate, what's in these dishes or products.
But there were so many fun days, and it was just one of the things. Of course, we met these really lovely people. So the human hearts around the world has been really great, just connecting with all these different people. But you work really hard actually to make these products, and people were champions on the way, like trawling all over the city. In London, there was a big protest the day we were filming, and we had to jump in and out of trains, and we had a huge schedule. It's just sort of 1,000 things. We travel all the way from Australia, and we've got all our gear, and 1,000 things can go wrong and often do. And people that we connected with were just great about it, and they feel like people we're going to know for a long time. And it's a really great part. Before we go into edit mammal mode, we're actually in full-on social mode. So we get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, there's so many incredible highlights, and I'm very excited to finish up the series. I watched a few episodes and still a few to go. So I'm very, very keen. I agree. The Miyoko's Creamery was just incredible. The fact that they even had a room to aged cheeses. It just felt so surreal, considering people have this. Even I thought there was a very big disconnect between dairy and plant-based cheeses, but it seems like the same process now, especially with systems like that. So it does make me think that there is little difference. And I love that you communicated that to the audience, so the audience sees that in reality, you're simply changing where you're reaching for on the shelf, and
Totally.
everything
Yeah.
else stays the same. Now, you mentioned earlier it's streaming on SBS and SBS On Demand. I wanted to know if there was any pushback from them or any other network, because it was something, let's be honest, plant-based can seemingly be a controversial topic at times. Was there any kind of pushback you found because of that?
No, I'd like to say that because we set out to make it mainstream, I'd like to say, we've been doing this a while now. We're experienced filmmakers. I'd like to think that we did it in a way that it just was like any other TV series, and the proof now is that we succeeded because SBS bought it. So, it literally had all the same ingredients of any other, that's a pun, isn't it? All the same ingredients of any other TV show. And we set out to do that. And that was really hard for us, because we wanted to, there were lots of times where we could have gone more political, or we could have gone, I don't know, a little more out there, but no, we stuck to the intention, and the intention was to make it mainstream. And yeah, we're so pleased that SBS bought it, and we look to, there's lots of other networks around the world that have bought it as well. And so awesome. That was always the intention. And it's interesting because I guess that's our craft now. We do stick to our intention because it's so easy to get sidetracked. But yeah, so.
That's awesome. And I'm going to follow up with that with a kind of selfish question, but I'm sure some people are thinking of it as well. What is the actual process of getting a show on the network or a network?
Well, for us, and there's many ways. For us, we for this one, and we've done it several ways, but on this one, we approached some sales agents. So we approached some distributors that we had worked with in our previous films, and and the one that we really like in the UK, they said yes, they took it on.
They take the journey with you a bit too. We showed it to them quite early on.
Yeah, so that and that is a fantastic boon as a filmmaker, because you know that they're going to sort of have your back when you finish it. But it still doesn't guarantee anyone's going to buy it. But they are the ones that took it to the film markets.
They only really take it if they think they can sell it.
So that's what we did on this one. We have had experience with dealing with networks directly, and that's another way. And I think there's no doubt, though, that the success, I hope this could be a segue, I don't know, but the success of Kangaroo has certainly put us on the map as filmmakers. So there's no doubt that the success of Kangaroo influenced, the distributor taking on Eating Plans, but also there's no doubt that SBS know who we are because of the noise that we made releasing Kangaroo. So that also helped.
Look, I do want to touch on Kangaroo, but I'm not going to let Eating Plants get away so quickly. There is one more question I had in my mind, which is, you mentioned earlier that in your mind, you felt like plant-based and vegan were very synonymous with each other. Now, in the episodes that I have watched, and like I said, I haven't finished the whole thing just yet, which is great. I'm so excited. I didn't actually see a mention of vegan or veganism. It was always referred to as plant-based revolution, plant-based food. The ingredients are all plants. Is that on accident or on purpose?
I think actually it is often referred to as both, because people choose their own languaging. So yeah, you might have had an ear out for that, but we use both quite, as you say, we use them quite synonymously. But look, I do think that for whatever political reason, people seem to be nervous around the word vegan sometimes.
Not seem to. They are.
I know, but really,
there is a nervousness.
Most people have a sort of, I mean, many people have a 70 to 80% vegan diet, regardless of whether they're into it or not, because they eat a lot of vegetables and they eat, and they love avocado and they love hummus and they love falafels. And I mean, a lot of people eat a lot of plant food anyway. It's just funny that it's got so political, or sad that it's got so political that people feel threatened by it, as you said before. And I just think we were in that mainstream way. We're trying to just let people in gently. In China, they talk about plant forward quite a lot for people who are just changing their diet, flexitarians that are putting more and more veggies on their plate, and slowly gathering speed as maybe not eating red meat, or maybe they're not eating chicken, maybe they're not eating fish, and just slowly eating their way to a fully plant-based diet. And I think it's kind of I think it's kind of a generous offering. Plant forward gives people a chance to consider the health benefits, the environmental benefits, and the animal issues, and move towards what they would think is a sort of personal choice, rather than feeling railroaded, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. People love to make that decision themselves. And I thought it was very intentional, but if it's not, that's even better, because it does fit within the theme of the show. And I was wondering, there was a lot of food shots, there was a lot of market shots, there was a lot of interview scenes, but it was very reliant on food, eating plants, right? I wanted to take this opportunity while we're talking about eating plants to ask if you guys had any advice in the realm of storytelling or production for someone looking to shoot food-related content.
Yeah.
Shooting food is fun.
It's fun. I mean, we'd never done it before, so I so don't think we're experts, but look, like with any artistic endeavor, it literally, you go for it and trial and error. That's what I love about what we do. We'd never done anything like this before, and we sat down and tried stuff. We filmed stuff, we rehearsed stuff. We just went for it, and that's the great thing about what we do. We get to experiment pretty much. And then, of course, the content becomes, your best friend, because most of the things we were filming were just so awesome and so alive and captivating that we were the conduits. But really, the advice I'd give is that you've just got to go for it and try things, because we'd never done it before.
We do work with an editor who helps us though too. So we like the storytelling aspect of who the characters are and what they're making, and we work a lot with what we think people don't know. That's a really big.
The newness is important.
Is a really big mode for us. So what don't they know? What don't they know? And then we try and kind of gather the story around that. And the editor helps heaps. It's fun collaborating. That's a really great part of the process, is having other people to work with, the graphic designer, the music people, the editor, all to create your shape in the end. And it's just a lovely sort of cross-cultural kind of connection you get with these people.
And the difference with documentary filmmaking as opposed to art or theatre or music or something, if we make a mistake, you generally don't see it because it ends up on the cutting room floor. So we're kind of privileged in that way, because we made a lot of mistakes, and that's the nature of it. So you don't get everything right. But it's a great process.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I'm really curious, because I pick up a camera myself, and when you're talking about collaborating with the editor, I'm just like, man. I mean, firstly, thank goodness for technology and allowing that to actually occur, so you don't have to be in the same room with them. But I'm going to ask another selfish question before I move on to Kangaroo. How are you actually collaborating with people that are outside the room? And I'm sure other creatives might be thinking that. Are you using certain softwares or programs that you would recommend, like the Adobe Share projects, or how are you doing that?
Yeah, it's tough. That you said that. I think I underplayed how that was tough in the edit process because we had
During COVID,
during the lockdown because we spent a lot of time without the editor in the room. So it was tricky. I mean, we were pretty old school about it. We would literally work in parallel together, and then our editor would send a version, and we'd send a version to him. It was a kind of a we thought we were going to do a lot of sharing, but we ended up not. We ended up
we had the capabilities, but
he set up TeamViewer, and we were looking at his screen, and he was looking at ours, but we tended to let him do a portion, and then we'd do a portion, and we'd do it that way. And it was somehow, I don't know, organically, that's just how it worked out. So we didn't actually.
I love that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there was, I guess, because it was episodic too. Like, sorry to keep raving on about Kangaroo, but we would not have been able to do that with Kangaroo because Kangaroo, the nuance of the story was so intricate in what we were doing. Whereas
over
with
the
eating
timeline,
whereas with it over the 100 minutes, like we had a storyboard as big as our room, which you had to be there to see that. You couldn't have been in another room. Whereas Eating Plants was episodic.
To be fair, we have worked with our editor for like nearly 25 years.
That helps.
So we also have a great connection, and I think that's big. If we had been
but the episodic nature of it meant that he could go and work on Miyoko, and we could go and work on Beyond Meat, and there wasn't any reason to connect them.
And we have a lovely trust with him, though, too.
Yeah, but I found that we wouldn't have been able to do Kangaroo.
No.
It was too... We had to go, no, that doesn't work.
We also send, just on the process thing, we send a lot. We are quite advanced when we first even get to the editor. So we do quite a lot ourselves
we're
before.
Quite good editors ourselves. So we, and probably the only reason we bring in our editors is because as Kate says, we love that collaboration. We love having someone come in.
He's a much better editor than us.
Oh, he's way better. But I'm just saying technically we could, but...
We chunk and clunk it together.
And he comes in and sorts us out, yeah.
All right, let's move on to Kangaroo. Let's do it. So I haven't had the time either to watch Kangaroo since I met you guys recently, but it's... From what I read, and it's so funny, since I learned about Eating Plants and then kind of dove into Kangaroo, I've seen it online a few times, and it's one of those things where you think red car and then you see red cars. And you know what? It is an award-winning film, and from what I gather, it's about the looming ethical paradox we have with kangaroos. And I think it was a trailer that mentioned that everyone overseas thinks that kangaroos are just such a loving thing in Australia, whereas in the reality... Actually, I'll let you kind of explain what did you uncover in the film without spoiling the actual whole thing.
Well, let's first off say that what you just said is
very good.
Is a really good beginning because I think that we found that idea very interesting. That we and people all over the world see kangaroos as this very special national emblem of Australia, recognised no matter what language you speak or wherever you are. That is what represents us, the kangaroo. If you had a kangaroo stitched to the back of your backpack, you
knew where you were from.
You could be anywhere in the world and someone would know where you're from. And in fact, it's one of the highest rating things people want to do when they come to Australia. Our $60 billion tourism industry, sits heavily on the back of the kangaroo. Yet, what we unpacked and what we sort of had a little insight to when we started was it's, in fact, it was the first interview where we got this quote. We just happened to start this interview with a scientist who worked for the government. He said, "Oh yes, well, it's the largest land-based wildlife massacre in the world." He didn't use massacre. What would he have said? Kill in the world. And we just sort of stopped in our shoes a bit then and went,
"Oh.
Wow, people don't talk about that much."
Perhaps this is a different film than we thought.
So we knew it was a funny kind of twisted story. And
we ended up calling it a love-hate story.
Yeah,
didn't we?
and
we
that's
ended up
really
calling Kangaroo a love-hate story. Because as you say, as you said, on one hand, we're prepared to love them on our sporting teams, and it's on the tail of the Qantas plane, and yet on the other hand, you go out and talk to a lot of people outside the cities, and they hate them. They want to get rid of them, and that was the crux of the story.
Yeah, I've actually met people. Some people in the country land do actually consider them a pest, which is so. Like just saying this alone in this introduction to the documentary probably blows a lot of people's mind, especially those living overseas. And we can't blame them for that when Australians themselves think of kangaroo. If most of the population metropolitan, they love seeing the kangaroos out in their nature. But I want to read you guys an interesting stat and then get your thoughts on it. And I found it in preparation for this. So the federal government table tells us that around 1.6 million kangaroos are slaughtered commercially. So this is just commercially each year. If one includes by kill and female shot, which is when it even has the joey in there, or males plus the largest females and all these humanely killed ones as well, this figure rises to a conservative estimate of about 2.25 million. And then there are those that are privately shot. So we're looking at the figure at around 4 million. So that's what I found on a government website, or I think it was a deep dive journalistic article. Is that kind of where the documentary explored how and why this is actually a thing?
Yeah, well first of all, we learnt that the government's been lying to us. So we learnt in this film that the government has been lying to us about kangaroos for over a generation, which is quite sobering. You know, I love this country. I choose to live here, and I love this country. But I found it really shocking that I'd been lied to my whole life. And let me unpack that. I've been lied to by the government messaging that tells me what they consider the populations of kangaroos to be, and they tell me what they consider how many they consider need to be killed every year by setting quotas. And that really shocked me when I learned that those population estimates were overinflated and they are not scientifically valid. So everything that flows from having population estimates that aren't scientifically valid and overestimated means that the whole commercial industry is based on a lie. So that's pretty full on. And that's something that is very uncomfortable for people to come to terms with. And that is why our film has been received here controversially. But it's what we experienced. We spent 5 years in production, and we spoke to all major stakeholders involved in kangaroos, and that's what we discovered. And then, it's so back to your point about the figures that you're indicating. It's very difficult to trust what the government is saying on their websites, because their messaging, they have to support their messaging, if you know what I mean. So it's a very it's an interesting situation because the commercial industry has sprung from this notion that we need to manage them. Because up until now, it was some shooters helping out landowners, and because they were perceived as a problem. But what has become the real problem is that the commercial industry is now using that perception of needing to manage them to justify increasing the kill numbers and being able to export the kangaroo meat and skins overseas. So basically, it's become a wildlife extraction, a bushmeat trade that is causing decline in kangaroos around Australia. So it's. I mean, I really, obviously, I urge people to watch the film because we unpack it in more detail than I can here, because it is quite complicated in some ways. But the simple terms are that the government has been lying to us in what's really been going on.
And just before we move on, where can someone watch the film?
Kangaroothemovie.com. All the streaming options are on kangaroothemovie.com. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and when was this released exactly?
2018.
So it's been 4 years since that. Do you think much has changed since the release in regards to how we treat them, or has anything been, changed in general?
One would have hoped that a lot of things would have changed, because I think to be fair, a lot of people don't know what's going on. There's a certain unconsciousness. I mean, just around any treatment of animals, there's a certain desire not to know. But in general, I think a lot of people didn't know. And I think our movie brought a lot of people into consciousness about how we treat kangaroos, what's happening with our kangaroos in the wild. No kangaroos are farmed, which was quite a misperception that people had, that the kangaroos that we're feeding our dogs and cats and families are farmed, but no, they're just taken directly from the wild.
That's
So
insane.
that has continued. There's still no farming because they can't be farmed. So literally after the film had come out, maybe a year later, we set up an NGO called Kangaroos Alive to keep telling people about what's
we were
going
compelled
on.
to, weren't we?
Yeah.
Because of what we learned. It was extraordinary.
There weren't many people in a really mainstream way fighting for kangaroos. There's been some
grassroots.
fantastic grassroots movements across the country for many years, but it was like their voices weren't being heard, and the film was sort of so noisy across the mainstream that it could do that more. And the evidence was irrefutable when people saw what was going on in the film.
I mean, we're really proud of what's happened since the film was released overseas. Europe and America, not surprisingly, were shocked at what they considered to be this paradise in Australia was doing this, this barbaric cruelty to the kangaroos every night. So we're really proud of the campaigns in Europe. I mean, basically, the European Union, when we were invited to screen the film at the European Parliament in Brussels, and after that screening, they were pretty angry, and they kicked into action pretty quickly. And so there is a campaign right now where a bill will be presented to the European Parliament to ban kangaroo imports into the EU, and that is the biggest market at the moment for the commercial kangaroo industry. So that will potentially cripple the industry. We're really proud of the effect of the film in that regard. But as Kate said, back here in Australia, it's been a bit slower because we're talking about long-held traditional beliefs that have been passed on from generation to generation that somehow the kangaroo is a problem.
And I think that's been, generated by politics, by industry, and by the media again and again. So, we hear these numbers, we hear the way they're doing it. It's just, it's a very touchy issue, and it makes a lot of people squirm, and a lot of people.
It's very uncomfortable.
It's a very uncomfortable issue to know your country treats its wildlife like this, but of course, the industry that has the power and direct link up to the former government was very strong on supporting it. And, we still have the idea that wildlife is somehow a resource that we can utilize. And in these situations where we commercially take wildlife, the wildlife cannot help but lose, because a commercial industry has a demand. It's not like they like to say it's sustainable or environmentally friendly, but basically when you're taking a wild population, you can't control it. There's no monitoring. So you just take, and basically there's local and regional extinctions now around Australia: urbanization, deforestation, roadkill, as you said before, droughts and floods that pass through places, the bushfires.
We're fascinated, aren't we? One thing, going back to being positive, the Kangaroos Alive that we set up, we instigated World Kangaroo Day 2 years ago, because we couldn't believe that we weren't celebrating this animal for what it was. Like we just couldn't believe that they got such bad press.
Again
Like
and again.
all the media we did in Australia, I reckon 80% of it was negative press, like attacking us for daring to tell this story. So we were like, well, hang on, why do they get such bad press? So we set up World Kangaroo Day, and it really is all about spending a day a year where we get to figure out, what is the value of this animal? Why don't we appreciate more than we do? And value it rather than always consider it to be a problem. And yeah, we had a meeting today, didn't we? We're planning for World Kangaroo Day this year. It's on October 24th, and it's a day where a whole lot of people do different activities celebrating this wonderful animal. Because I still don't get it why Australia doesn't make more of a thing about our wildlife. I mean, we're one of the only places on earth that have these magnificent animals, and yet night after night we allow this brutality to happen. It's a dark secret.
It's a very unusual thing too, because the kangaroo industry itself is not worth that much money.
It's not a big
compared
industry
to the tourism industry, which is worth billions. And
so
it's a crazy idea that we don't it's like the two hands aren't talking to one another. We're just stuck in a sort of colonial paradigm that we feel is somewhat, I think, attached to our national identity, and we don't want to stop doing that for the sake. Like right now in Canberra, they're commercially culling kangaroos around the Canberra metropolitan area, sort of based on some dubious science that kangaroos are taking up landscape that urbanization and hooved animals has long since ruined. Has long since corralled them into smaller and smaller areas. And, Canberra is the most amazing city when you go down and there's kangaroos sort of, so close to the central city.
Even naturally just there.
Even on the those rolling hills up to the Parliament and stuff. And, we've been talking about since we made the movie, why wouldn't you make that a huge feature of Canberra, that it's like a wildlife city, that the humans and wildlife can coexist with one another and sort of be celebrated
rather than
and like I'm not sure how many of the tourists, like what percentage of tourists go to Canberra who come from overseas, but surely if that was a thing, everyone would go there. Who wouldn't want to go to a city that had wildlife just so beautifully, and like the natural herbivores and the joeys and the mothers and the mobs, and how beautiful they are to watch in the wild.
So we urge your viewers to watch the film and to have the discussion, create the discussions with their family and communities, because it is a polarizing issue, but just have the discussion, because it's clearly an issue, and we're really worried about what's happening and the decimated, the declining populations. So yeah, and we can all play our part by becoming educated and becoming knowledgeable on what is really going on, because as I said at the beginning, we've been lied to all this time.
Well, there's so many things we can dissect over here. I am really confused. I'm kind of feeling what I'd imagine I'd feel after watching the documentary. Sorry, I'm just not understanding why it's so like that. So the first thing which thankfully Kate answered. So they're not commercially farmed. Now, in my mind, this is incredibly dangerous because we can't run estimates on how many there are alive. And it's so funny that I'm having this conversation now, because I was just talking to my fiance, I think today or yesterday. I'm like, it's so fascinating. We've been in Uluru in that Red Centre region we're there for over a week. And I'm like, I have not seen one kangaroo. I'm like, you think the center of Australia, no, very little human life, a small amount of cars compared to the metropolitan region, so much bushland and hiding and shelters, not a single kangaroo, not even as roadkill. So that's where you would see a lot of animals in like Tasmania. but there was just nothing. And we saw like 2 emus over the course of that whole time, or even 1 emu. And I was just so confused. And this answers a lot of questions. And it really is dangerous, because once we really start to dwindle the numbers, as we can see time and time again through many ecosystems, it's going to be out of balance, because something always relies on another thing in the environment. So a kangaroo is prey and predator. And when you mess with that sequence, I'm really worried as to what will or can happen to the Australian environment. And that's awesome that it's getting a lot of attention from the
Oh, yeah.
EU.
Yeah.
And because it's something that's very defeating, because you're like, a kangaroo, like I didn't even know people eat kangaroos as much as they do. I don't know if I even know someone that eats kangaroo. It's so weird. And I'm sure a lot of people didn't even know that Australians eat kangaroos, and it's given as pet food. That's also very new information. So it's awesome that you guys are setting up World Kangaroo Day and have done all that, because there isn't a spokesperson. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, actually, while I've got it racking in my brain, is, we know in the meat and dairy industry, we've got certain lobbying groups fighting for certain rights. These are things like the Red Meat Advisory Council, the Dairy Australia, Beef Council. So we've got these industries that have a lot of dollar bills that try to influence our political system. Does the kangaroo industry have a powerful lobby that interferes? You're already nodding your head. So what is the influence, or where do they kind of sit in and talk to politicians, or what kind of power have you seen them have in the past?
Well, I'll give you an example. The EU campaign is clearly working, because we learned from our European colleagues that the Australian government is funding a social media blitz in Europe at the moment, promoting the benefits of eating kangaroo. So that's happening.
Fascinating.
That's happening right now, and that's our taxpayers' money being spent on promoting the consumption of kangaroo meat.
Yeah, and one of the
That's
things
happening right now, and so, I mean, that's the effect of the campaign. They are worried about this trade being shut down, and so they should be. So they should be. It's their biggest market, and the Europeans have made it really clear that they think we've heard them call us barbarians, because they say that's what you might do in Australia, but that's not what we do in Europe. So
I mean, the issue that we haven't really talked about is the treatment of joeys, because mothers.
I was trying to keep it positive, but
Okay, so just
No,
because.
give us the reality,
Okay,
because
so
I think
one of the biggest problems in Europe and America and here
here the biggest problem is here every night,
yeah.
every night, baby
So-
joeys.
So when mothers are shot, as you said earlier, Tom, often they have a baby joey in the pouch. So that baby is reliant on them still. It's still breastfeeding. And even if it can be like up to 1.5, 2 years old, it's still jumping in and out of that pouch, which is a funny thing to watch. And joeys are the cutest,
the best.
as in most baby animals. Anyway, because the shooters kill the mothers, and at night they shoot females and males, and they of course want the larger species so that they can get more pounds, or more kilos to sell per kilo. The joeys are either in the pouch, and the shooters drag them out of the pouch and then smash their heads over the bull bar, or
Stomp on them.
stomp on their heads,
We've witnessed this, so we know this is true.
or slit their throats alive just there and then, like that. That's a normal way to treat baby animals and our native wildlife, and that is the most shocking, horrendous thing. And the other thing that happens, of course, is the joeys that aren't in the pouch are just left to go off on their own
Die of
and
exposure.
die of exposure, or hunger. And this treatment of joeys is just undeniably wrong. There's no way. The industry tries to say it's the most humane way of killing, which in itself is the weirdest sentence. But the most humane is just like, you just hear that when you're interviewing people, and you go, what bit of humane is that? Like, it's just so bizarre. And of course, once you start telling people that happens every night across Australia, everyone's shocked. It's a human reality. It is disgusting and it's brutal and it's you can't think about it too much because it's just so wrong and it just hurts so much to think about.
We produced a TV commercial last year for Europe. It's a 60-second commercial, and you can find it on the Kangaroos Alive website. And
I'll get you guys to email it to me so I can put it in the show notes for people to check it out.
Yeah, and basically it just shows, it's not nice, it's not great footage, but it shows what happens, and it has footage of a mother kangaroo that's lying on her back after being shot, and the joey just sitting on her, still alive. Yeah, it's Australia's dirty secret. This is going on every night, and it's just uncomfortable to talk about, and we've done it. We're doing our bit to shine a light on it. And again, we just urge people to have the discussion. Is this really what we want to be doing with our national icon? Is this something that is it's just, as Kate said, there's no ethical justification for doing this. And it's up to us to have these discussions with our community.
Yeah, and like we often sort of go on about places like China are barbarians, they do this and that. And, we went there to China to film, and Uncle Max, who came with us, asked them if they would eat their panda bear. And they just looked at the Australian delegation that we went with and said, of course we wouldn't. Like, why would you eat your panda bear? Like that is our sort of, big thing. And it was just like, they were very confused at that point that we would eat the kangaroo. It's not, we shouldn't be throwing stones at other countries when we're doing these sort of things.
How do I follow on to that with a question? It is very confronting to hear. It is incredibly hard to hear, and even more difficult to comprehend. It's definitely not the first time I've heard of something adjacent to that. A few years ago, I'd watched Earthlings, and if you have watched it, you understand that this very much sounds like, when you're talking about the joeys, I was thinking about piglets, how they rip their tails off with pliers in their ears, and they sometimes just smack them and whatnot. But that is, if that doesn't make you feel sad and even potentially angry, check yourself out, because that is not right. It is very sad and disheartening that this is allowed. And what's even more, I guess, frustrating is not just the action that this is allowed. I've spoken a lot about the ocean, and the ocean's really hard because there's little regulation. And I think the Australian outback kind of has a relationship with that concept, because it's, how can you regulate something that is, like you said, kangaroos, for those who don't know, a lot of Australian animals, because of the heat in our landscape, they're nocturnal. And so people are going to go out at night, and how are you going to regulate 1 a.m. shootings, cullings? You're going to miss animals, you can't see properly. And who's out there monitoring this? So it's just horrific. But the question I want to lean onto that with is, and this might be a bit of greenwashing from the government if it does happen, is there a regulatory body that is meant to assess the killings, regulate the ethical standards? Is there something that has been put into place to try to make this is ethical? So they say it's ethical, but is there a body in charge of the numbers, the ethic, and so forth?
Yeah, there is, and there is management, provided by the state governments. But the major issue is, and this all came up and one of the things we're really proud of is that the film has also led to a parliamentary inquiry in the state of New South Wales.
Wow, awesome.
And that was awesome. And that was led by the Animal Justice Party, and big shout out to the work that they do. And that Senate inquiry in the Parliament of New South Wales was only last year. So it's really fresh evidence. And some of the things that came out of that inquiry, we are now using in our advocacy and our campaigning. And that, one of the things that came out was that there is no monitoring, as you said, when the animals are killed. There's none. and that's irrefutable. The government can't defend that. So if there's no monitoring when the animals are killed, we've got no way of knowing how the animal was killed, right? So we know it's cruel. We know they miss. We know we've witnessed them stomping on Joey's head, so we know it's cruel. So as much management as they like
from the office,
from the state government or the federal government, we know that there's no monitoring. That came out in the Senate inquiry. So it's not just us as filmmakers talking. The second thing that came out of the inquiry, which is just gobsmacking, is that neither the federal government or the state governments record or count baby Joeys as part of the industry. They had to admit at that Senate inquiry they've got no idea how many baby Joeys are killed every year in Australia. Now we just take that to the European Parliament and they just laugh at us. So you can have as much management as you like, but whilst that is going on, that's not management. That's just leaving it to people out in the bush doing what they like, as you said.
The sort of sad part about it all is they're only guidelines. They're not law. So shooters in the industry are supposed to follow guidelines. So really, a lot of people who complain in small towns or who live next to shooting, the police or the authorities come back to them and say, well, we can't do anything about it because they've got licenses and they're not doing anything illegal, even if it's like right beside fences of people who live in the area. And they seem to be protected by their own industry, but the kangaroos are under guidelines.
I mean, it gets back to the ethical question. Do we really want to be doing this to our national icon? Is this something that you do in the 21st century in Australia? I think that's the question we ask in the discussion with your community and your friends, and
with your government bodies
and your government. We've had a federal election in Australia. Take it to the new federal government. Is this really how we should be treating our national icon? And that's the question. Because you can have all the management in the world you like, but really, is this what we want to be doing to it? Do we want to be chopping it up and sending it to America as pet food? Do we really want to be stripping the skin off it and selling it as soccer shoes or, handbags? I mean, I reckon that's the question,
Great question. And to tackle on, we've spoken about the government affair, and an episode just came out 2 days ago, and me and my fiance dove into what the Labor government does promise, and live sheep export is on their list of bans. So I'm thinking kangaroos aren't if you're willing to ban live sheep export, I'm thinking there's some ethics there. And with the Greens now securing 5 seats, they don't want to be part of this. And with Emma, who we've had on the show previously, Emma Hurst, the Animal Justice Party MP, I'm hoping that she really does some incredible work in that field. So my mind is going in 2 places here. We've got the EU, as always, being setting the example and being more proactive than Australia, of course, and banning that. And I'm hoping, like you said, it'll really damage the lobbying and the industry. And I hope it isn't going to lead to just the killing stays the same, but it's just left as discarded waste. And I've put waste in quotes because that's what different industries do. So we've got the EU making this change that's going to impact the industry. As an Australian, realistically, I'd love just kangaroo meat stop and a bunch of other meats, all meats really. But what is the next step in your mind to start on this trend of becoming a more ethically aligned, treating this animal with the respect that it deserves?
We came up with the word. We didn't really
come up with it, but
we learnt the word coexistence. And that's, just let that sink in, because it certainly sunk in with us, didn't it? This whole notion, we can actually coexist with them. We don't need them to be a problem. We don't need them to be managed. And that's huge. Like
the kangaroos have been living in Australia or adapting to the Australian continent for 25 million years. And
without harming
they're
anything,
an old bloody animal.
Without harming anything. So this notion
gentle herbivores.
I mean, they're vegan. Without this notion of them being a problem. So, so that was really something that struck us, wasn't it? This notion that we could coexist with them, and what does that look like? and who do we have to bring to the table to have that discussion? And no doubt landholders and farmers are a big part of that discussion, and we want to be part of that discussion because that's, to us, isn't it, that where we want to be, learning to coexist with our wildlife.
Looking at like we have to do with climate change and the climate crisis, is really start looking at ways ahead that are viable, sustainable, ethical, 7 generation, all that stuff. We need to really decide who we are and what future we're going to have. And
because at the moment we're going to lose the kangaroo.
Yes.
So that's where we're heading. So do we want that?
Do you know, or do you have like a conservative estimate on how many kangaroos are left?
No one has any idea because the science has been mostly industry and government driven or funded. And bear in mind there's many species of kangaroos, but we focused on the big 4 that are commercially viable. But we know that once you get local and regional extinction, and you touched on this before, they don't go back. You can't just put them back. They've gone. And when you look at the maps of regional extinction across New South Wales and Queensland, it's growing. And that only means one thing, that it will continue to grow until we have, mass extinction. So, and, we get labelled crazy when we say this because the government are trying to tell us that there's billions of them, so, but...
there's been interesting, just a little side note, that when we were filming, the farmers would say, "Oh, you should get out here. There's huge mobs out here. You should be filming."
Plagues, they said.
It's plague. They like to use this word plague. And we were like, "Oh, cool.
As filmmakers,
visually, that will look awesome. Let's do that." So we would literally put out the word that we will get on a plane as soon as you've seen a plane.
If you can show us where they are.
Yeah, and literally we never saw plagues.
No, not one single landholder took us up.
Isn't that so fascinating?
And there's a reason for that.
And like anecdotally, the Animal Justice Party have done 2 summers of travelling around Australia,
asking for social media comments.
Yeah, and like you, people have been saying, "I've driven from Sydney to Perth.
I haven't seen
a kangaroo," or "I've driven from Darwin, down to Adelaide."
So if there are millions, you should be seeing them every day.
Yeah,
a lot of them.
A lot of them.
Do you remember, for context, like, I'm 26, but I remember just 10 years ago driving, there would be so many. I wouldn't be able to drive at night comfortably at all because you got to go half the speed limit to avoid them because you're both in danger if you collide with each other. Like, it's insane how different the roads are now.
Yeah.
Like, it's
And there's a reason for that. I mean, but look, getting back to coexistence, I don't think it's that complicated. I don't think it's such a complicated issue. We know that there are some really fabulous farmers out there that want to be part of this solution. It's not an us and them situation. We want to bring everyone to the table to discuss because it got to the point where Kate and I will drive around the country now and we'll ask people, first thing we'll ask, do you want kangaroos on the landscape? That's the first question we ask when they start complaining about them. And if they say yes, well, then we say, well, what does that look like?
So what?
Because they think that you just got to get rid of them, but no.
And it's not like we're going from zero because they're funding like large fencing throughout Queensland, and there's money being put into keeping kangaroos out of farmers' properties. That money could be put into a lot of other things,
learning how to coexist,
which is learning how to coexist. You could grow certain crops. You could just have less hooved animals. You could do rotate paddocks. There's so many different ways that, like Indigenous people work with kangaroos, for example. They had them too, of course, for early. And when you read the early books of farming, the farming practices with Indigenous people, they were also living alongside wildlife. So they had their own measures of working with the wildlife. So, look, I think it's a really... maybe it's going to happen with this new government, and we are going to just be a lot more creative and use our minds and our finances instead of funding what we're doing right now and keeping that all afloat by, subsidies to agriculture and subsidies to industry and subsidies to this and that. We could actually sit down and use those subsidies to really plan promising futures where
we
both
want to. One of the things we're doing on World Kangaroo Day is kangaroo watching. Woo! I mean,
That's awesome.
People laughed at those early whale watchers, and look what happened then, right? I mean, it's like, come on, what are we doing? Do we want them or not? And that's where we're at. And I think most people want them, and they are. Hey, look, one of the positives of making Kangaroo was we got to spend time with them, and oh my god, they're the most magnificent animal. I learned so much, and the level of care. Oh my god, like that they have this whole auntie system where the females, if there's a joey in distress, I've seen it. The aunties will just go to this joey. It's not theirs. Like, so there's this whole highly social, highly intelligent mob structure.
And the males are teaching the young males how to behave.
It's just the most magnificent animal. And yet I didn't know that. Here I have grown up in Australia, first of all, being lied to about them being a problem, and then not even being taught how magnificent they are right in our own backyard.
It's so sad.
They are
such a loss, that we've really sort of missed out on kind of seeing the wealth.
It's not too late.
Yeah, and I think it's really our generation and people living now should pause and really go, how do we want it now? Who do we want to be? We've got these new people in Parliament that are just speaking clearly and respectfully and, listening. So hopefully that'll all, bode well for the kangaroos and generally in eating plants and generally a sort of a kinder way of life.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up how the Indigenous really had that relationship with the kangaroo. Being in Uluru, we happened to learn a lot about the culture and what they did. And what's so fascinating about the way that these are populations that were here for thousands of years that never knew where their next meal was coming from. And yet when they'd see a population, they would scare them away and only hit the last one, but only when the other animals wouldn't notice. So only when it was too late, they're like, oh, you must have gone somewhere else. And then these are populations that, again, didn't know where the next meal was coming from, but still weren't getting greedy because they understood that this is a relationship we have to have where we don't take more than we need. So I really think that was an important point, that we're here for thousands of years, coexisted. We come in and we're like, not in our watch. But I wanted to round this episode out. You've got these amazing films, obviously success coming all around. What is the next thing in the pipeline for you two?
Well, we're pretty excited because there's been quite an enthusiastic response to eating plants. And so we're going to take the opportunity to do another 6 episodes. And
Series 2.
Series 2 is coming.
Wow,
so we've
awesome.
been talking to some different people today and just doing a lot of research and just getting some more food, more recipes, more.
It feels like it literally feels like we've only just scratched the surface, doesn't it? And
yeah.
We were waiting to see how the first one went and was received, and the reception's been so positive. And it feels like we're riding a wave, aren't we, of growth, and so yeah, we're very excited.
Awesome. And can you give like a divulge as to what cities you're going to explore?
Well, if people want to write to us, they can
give some ideas.
Give us some ideas.
We're happy to take ideas. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great segue to where can people go to connect with you both?
Okay, so we have kangaroothemovie.com. That's one place. And then eatingplants.tv. Both those have got the streaming of the series and the doco on them.
And you can get us on the socials.
And you can find us on our socials and all of that too. And really happy to link up with people.
No, but seriously, we'd love to hear people with suggestions for Series 2 because I'm sure that the viewers watching this will have opinions on it. So we'd love to hear from them.
Awesome. And I do love to end the episode giving my guests, 1 to 2 minutes to really take the platform and leave us all with some words of wisdom. This could be something related to what we talked about today or something completely irrelevant. So I wanted to give you both the platform for 2 minutes to just speak your mind and leave us with one last nugget.
I think in both our 2 recent productions, talking about it to people in a sort of generous way has been really life-changing, both for us and for friends. And I mean, when we first started making Kangaroo, we'd have dinner parties and people would go, no, you're wrong. I know. I grew up in the country. My uncle's a farmer. And, slowly over the time, through both like being vegans or eating plants and through Kangaroo, we've found out more information. We've got really informed ourselves, and we've brought those conversations to dinner tables and to cafes and to pubs and to just general chat. And I think that's been really huge, and just gently telling people, what's really going on. And I feel like that's started to make a real difference. And I think if everyone is doing that, like in the supermarket, if someone's buying kangaroo meat and you've watched the movie, you just pop up to them and say, oh, did you know that that's like our national icon? They're not farmed, and they, it's whatever they want to say. I just think, tell everyone, just gently find ways to invite your friends and family to be informed.
Yeah, and I think from I try and walk my talk, live my own experience, if you like, and be true to myself in what I do. What works for me, and that includes what I eat. I really feel like I am what I eat. I am how I exercise, and I am how I treat others, and I just feel like that's my MO of living, that if I can be an authentic me, then hopefully I'm going to contribute in some way to society. And, we have 2 kids as well. And I think the responsibility of parents out there to try and, encourage their kids to ask questions and be curious and, make good decisions. And these are simple things, but they get me up in the morning and inspire me to do what I do.
And we're all guardians. We all should take that role.
Awesome. I love the inspiring change you guys both hope to make in the world. It definitely shines through in eating plants, and even the way you talk about this beautiful animal that we all, I think, love in one way or another, which is a kangaroo. It's really inspiring, the change that you guys are making through the EU and actually making waves in Australia. So the kangaroos can't speak, so on their behalf, I say thank you. Thanks from my end as well, because it is an animal that I do love and I do miss seeing out and about. And I used to go to Holes Gap and Grampians and see swaths of them. And I don't want to lose that experience, especially for the next generation. It is a wild animal. It is a beautiful animal. And it is an animal that belongs in this ecosystem. So I thank you for all the work you're both doing for that incredible creature. I'm sure it will benefit every single one of us in the long run, especially if you haven't been to Australia yet and you haven't seen one in real life. They are really a blessing. The little curious look up, like when they're eating and they just look up and look at you. It's such a beautiful moment, and I definitely don't want other people to be missing out. So thank you for all that, and again for spending some time and having this incredible conversation. I hope people have taken some nuggets and some wisdom out of that, and are starting to have conversations about these industries that we need to change as soon as possible. And if they do have suggestions on a new place to film eating plants in different friendly cities, I'm sure some of you will have. Definitely reach out to the both of them. But other than that, I will see you guys next time, and good luck on season 2.
Thanks, Tom.
Hi there. Welcome to the end of the episode. Thank you again to Kate and Mick for coming on and sharing your incredible wisdom, and for all the work that you do as well. Thank you everyone for listening the whole way through, whether you listened or actually watched. I do know a fair few of you are on YouTube, so hi. How you going? I'll give you a little bit of a wave there. This was an incredible episode, so I hope that someone got something out of this. If you did, you can shoot us up a message on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, wherever you like to live. Give us a message. Tell us what you took away from this episode. If you want to contact Kate and Nick to talk about this episode further, I'll leave their contact details, or their best contact details anyway, in the show notes below. And if you did enjoy this episode, just feel free to tick that like button, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, all the good stuff. And I will see you on next week's episode. But until then, stay happy, eat plants. Peace.